So take any major scale and just start it from the 4th note. How about A flat? If you're anything like me, at some point you've probably wondered to yourself, what on earth are the Greek modes? Why do I care about them and how do I use them? This was something that was confusing to me when I was first learning about them, and the way that they were explained to me by a few different teachers along the way, it left me kind of even more confused until I finally figured out how to think about modes and why they matter. So first things first, let's start with just looking at a scale in general. One of the very first things that you'll learn as you're learning any instrument is you're gonna learn the major scale. If you play the piano, probably the first thing you ever learned in terms of scales was the C major scale. But it's worth noting what even is a major scale and what makes it a major scale. It does not matter what type of scale, what crazy name you can come up with. Every single scale that you have ever played and ever will play on any instrument can be described very simply as a series of steps, a series of intervals. Most commonly, it's a series of whole steps and half steps, just in a certain order. So for example, if we look at the C major scale and we start on C, well, we can see that the C major scale is made up of a whole step, a whole step, a half step, there's nothing in between, another whole step, whole step, whole step, and then finally, we have a half step. There's nothing in between, right? Whole, half, whole, half. Here's the cool thing about scales. It doesn't matter what key you're in. Every single scale is the same. So if we start on F sharp, we can say the same thing. We start on F sharp and we say whole, half, whole, half. Super easy to remember, super easy to apply to any key. It doesn't matter if you're familiar with that key or if you know how to play scales in that key. You can always pick out the major scale if you know the formula. And the formula is whole, half, whole, half. That's it. Now that's the major scale, but the trick here is that every single scale has a formula. Every single scale can be explained in the exact same way. It's just a different combination of whole steps and half steps, and even sometimes you might get into steps beyond whole steps and half steps, like the harmonic minor scale, which contains a minor third. So the harmonic minor scale sounds like this. Well, we have a weird jump towards the end of that scale, and we can again describe it just in a matter of steps. We start on C, so our first step that we're going to make is a whole step. Then we have a half step, a whole step, half step, minor third, half step. So what we're illustrating here is that no matter what you're talking about in regards to scales, every single scale, whether it's major, minor, or any other wacky thing you can possibly think of, they can all be described as a series of whole steps, half steps, or whatever other interval it may be. The thing that confused me when I first learned about modes is that they were described to me in relation to the major scale. So for example, when I first learned about modes, somebody said this. So here's how it works. You have 7 Greek modes of the major scale, and they are, which is just the normal major scale, that's Ionian. You have Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and that brings you back to Ionian. Well, that's cool, but what does that actually tell us? That just says, well, if I play the notes of the C major scale, but I start on the 3rd and go up to the 3rd of the C major scale, like, okay, I guess that's Phrygian, but I didn't really understand why, and I didn't really understand what that meant. Here's the other way to think about it, and when you combine both of these, you go, oh, I get why it was explained that way in the first place, but then I also further understand what that actually means. So in addition to thinking about all scales as a combination of whole steps, half steps, and occasionally some other intervals like a minor third, we can also look at it as it's either a major scale or it's a major scale with some alterations. Here's what I mean. When we talked about the harmonic minor scale, we said that it was, starting on C, we said it was whole step, half step, whole step, half step, minor third, half step. That is what you might call the intervallic formula for that harmonic minor scale. But there's another way to think about it, and that is, how did we change the C major scale to get to that? Because we know C major is very simply right? No alterations, just whatever the notes that would naturally exist in the C major scale, that's what they are. It's unchanged. We've made no changes to that scale. What changes do we have to make to that scale in order to create the harmonic minor scale? Well, let's take a look. The root, or in this case C, that is just normal, that doesn't change. The second, that doesn't change either, so D is just normal. However, when we get to the third of the scale, what would normally be E is now E flat. So we have a flat third. So far we know that C harmonic minor is 1, 2, flat 3. What about our 4? Well, that's the same as it is in the normal C major scale, so that's unchanged. 5 also is the same as the C major scale, so again, unchanged. 6, well, 6 in the C major scale is not A flat, it's A. So what have we done to that A? We've made it flat, flat 6. So far we know it's 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6. What about our 7? What is it normally in the C major scale? 5, 6, 7, it's normally B. Well, guess what? In the C harmonic minor scale, it's also B, so that is unchanged. So what we've just determined is that the C harmonic minor scale is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, 7, and that takes us back to C. So we've now established two different ways to think about scales. You can think about the intervallic formula, the combination of whole steps, half steps, and occasionally maybe minor thirds. Or we can think about it in terms of what changes did we make to the normal major scale to get us to this scale that we're playing. Now, this is the trick that kind of opened up for me what modes were and how to think about them and how to much more clearly find them in different keys and ultimately to use them. Like I mentioned before, the first way that I learned about them, which was kind of confusing, was, well, just think about it as the major scale starting from different points. The switch in my brain that really helped me understand what was going on here was when I thought about it not in terms of, well, the second mode of the major scale or the third mode of the major scale and just, oh, well, that means I play C major from E to E. That's great, but it doesn't help us that much because you don't fully understand what that means. A better way to look at it is if I'm playing from E to E on all the white notes, yes, that is the third mode of the C major scale. But what happens if we think about it as an E scale? Forget C. Let's just think about this as though it were an E scale of some kind. Well, now we have to think about, well, if we take E major, what did we change about E major to arrive at this? Okay, well, let's take a look. So E major would be E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E. Those are the notes that naturally exist in the E major scale. Well, clearly you can see we've made some changes from that. So what are those changes? Well, E, of course, that's normal, so that's our 1. Well, what about our 2? Immediately, we find our first alteration. It should be F sharp, but what have we done to that F sharp? We've made it flat, which turns it into F natural. Well, that's a flat 2. Let's keep going. What about the 3? It should be G sharp, but again, we've made that flat as well by turning it into a G natural. So we have a flat 2 so far, and then we also have a flat 3. Well, what about our 4? That's normal. That occurs in E major, so that just stays the same, natural 4. 5 is also the same as it would be in E major, so that's just natural as well. Well, our 6 should be C sharp, but again, we've made it flat by lowering it a half step to C natural. So we have a flat 6. And finally, with the 7th, well, it should be D sharp, but we've made it flat. It's D natural. So we have a flat 7. So now you can see how we can think of this as a formula in the sense of, well, it's 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and that brings us to 1. This mode, which previously was confusing because you're thinking of it like, well, it's C major, but starting on E, like, okay, what does that mean? I mean, it's, okay, I can play all the notes of C major from E to E, but I still don't understand what that means. Now we've converted thinking about it that way into thinking about it as, this is just an E scale of some kind, and we've just made changes to whatever the E major scale would normally be. So we can do that in any key. Let's try it in how about A? Flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, and that brings us back to 1. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the other way to think about it, that we said before, is, well, Phrygian is the 3rd mode of the major scale. What is A the 3rd of in a major scale? This is the 3rd mode of F major. Watch what happens when we apply that formula, flat 2, flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7, to A, okay? We get A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, and A. Let's play that from F, those same exact notes. It's just F major. So what was this confusing sort of like, wait a second, are we thinking of it as the 3rd mode of the major scale, or does it have a formula? Does it have alterations that we can use to create it in any key? The short answer is it's both, but what allows us to actually understand it and subsequently use it is to understand how those two ways of thinking about it combine so that those two ways of thinking don't confuse us. So very quickly, let's do 2 things that maybe will help illustrate this a little better. I'm gonna do what I did at the beginning, which was play each mode as though it were a mode of the C major scale. And that looks like this. The Greek mode name for C major is Ionian. The 2nd mode is Dorian. The 3rd mode is Phrygian. The 4th mode is Lydian. The 5th mode is Mixolydian. The 6th mode is Aeolian, which also happens to be the same as natural minor. The 7th mode is Locrian. Now let's do the same thing. We'll play through all 7 Greek modes, but we're gonna do it from C to C, and I'm going to overlay the formula for how they're built. So Ionian, of course, has no alterations. Dorian happens to have a flat 3 and a flat 7. Phrygian has a flat 2, flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7. Lydian has a sharp 4. Mixolydian has a flat 7. Aeolian, or natural minor, has a flat 3, flat 6, and flat 7. And Locrian has a flat 2, flat 3, flat 5, flat 6, and flat 7. So that is the clearest illustration of the 2 ways we can think about it. We can think about them as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th mode of a single major scale, or we can learn the formula for how they are built and what alterations each one contains that changes it from what the C major scale normally would be. I really hope this has been helpful. If you have any further questions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. We'll do another video at some point soon going further in depth into the explanation of how these work in relation to chords and why some of them work with certain chords, and how if you're playing over a chord progression, what ones you might want to choose depending on what chord you're playing at any given time. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.